The entire court erupts when cops realize the black woman they framed works for the CIA. This is complete nonsense. The words echoed through the courtroom, but Althea Hayes didn't flinch. She sat there, hands cuffed, accused of a crime she didn't commit. The evidence seemed ironclad, the witnesses police officers with airtight statements. The verdict felt practically decided before she even walked in, but there was one thing no one in that room knew. They weren't just trying to convict an innocent woman. They were playing a dangerous game with someone who had the power to bring down their entire system. By the time the truth came out, it wouldn't just be a trial, it would be a reckoning. A single shaft of sunlight poured through the tall, narrow window of Courtroom 3B in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia, illuminating the freshly polished mahogany benches. It was a Friday afternoon, and the thick swirl of routine legalities hung in the air like an invisible fog. Clerks shuffled by, arms laden with files and paperwork. Lawyers in crisp suits chatted discreetly, sharing polite nods and occasional stiff smiles. The only conversation that seemed not to fit into this polite hush was the heated exchange between Detective Caleb Foster and Officer Grant Davies, two cops who wore their tension like a second skin. Judge Diane Kramer, known for her meticulous approach to justice, was scheduled to preside over a case that had been whispered about in corridors for days. Though on the docket it appeared as an unremarkable drug possession charge, something about it was different. The alleged suspect was Althea Hayes, a petite black woman in her early 30s. According to the official statement, Althea had been apprehended in possession of a considerable stash of narcotics, and she was now facing serious felony charges that could land her a decade or more behind bars. But that was just the surface story. Most who glimpsed Althea found it unbelievable that she could be a drug trafficker. Everything from her confident stride to her spotless, if slightly understated, style indicated an entirely different reality. Across town, Althea's family and a few close friends wrestled with shock and desperation. Most of them had rushed to secure the best attorney they could afford, a bright, relentless lawyer named Nolan Sharp. Nolan was new to the area but came highly recommended for his fearless approach to tackling injustice. Althea, however, seemed oddly composed from the moment she was taken into custody at the Alexandria Police Department. Even more strangely, no one had been able to fully decipher her personal background. A thorough check of her records revealed only clean data, no criminal history, glowing references from prior employers, a stable rental history, and a series of short stints in volunteer work that ranged from community centers to adult literacy programs. In short, Althea was either the perfect model citizen or someone who had meticulously curated her public persona. Detective Foster, nursing a throbbing headache, was the lead investigator. He and Officer Davies had been on a stakeout in a rundown part of Alexandria when they reportedly observed Althea conducting a suspicious exchange with a known drug runner. According to the police report, they followed Althea to a modest apartment building and later found several bricks of cocaine in a duffel bag in her trunk. It all sounded too neat, too convenient, yet the official police narrative didn't leave much room for doubt on paper, except for the fact that Althea insisted she had never possessed that duffel bag in her life. It was planted, Althea stated firmly at every questioning. But Althea's protestations had fallen on deaf ears among the local precinct, and the cops believed they had secured their newest bust. In the city's restless environment, where law enforcement strived to prove they were tough on crime, Althea had become the perfect scapegoat. The media was already swirling with talk, another major drug trafficker about to face the hammer of justice. Many in Althea's circle suspected something deeper, something sinister, but they had no way of backing up her claims. The cops insisted they had done everything above board. Althea insisted she was innocent. Meanwhile, Althea's assigned prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Madeline Pierce, was known for being methodical, even ruthless, when presenting drug charges. She would typically come into the courtroom with painstakingly compiled evidence and deliver it with calm precision. That's exactly what she planned to do for Althea's trial. It never once crossed her mind that the police might have tampered with the evidence. Madeline's worldview was simple. Criminals should go to jail, and cops told the truth. It was a perspective Althea would soon upend in a cataclysmic way. Yet even Althea's tireless lawyer, Nolan Sharp, was in the dark about the whole truth. From the day Althea hired him, she had spoken in riddles, assuring him that if they simply held their ground, everything would work out. She refused to let him call certain witnesses or even dig too hard into her finances. "Trust me," she had said, looking Nolan straight in the eye. "Just follow procedure. Make them present their case. I'll be exonerated by the time it's all over." There was a gleam in her gaze that Nolan couldn't interpret. He chalked it up to Althea's unwavering belief in her own innocence. Little did anyone know that Althea had spent the better part of the past decade serving in a clandestine role for the Central Intelligence Agency. She had operated under deep cover on missions in West Africa, Eastern Europe, and occasionally in domestic investigations tied to international threats. Her real station was in an unmarked building near Langley. There, Althea had developed a reputation as a brilliant intelligence analyst who could blend into almost any environment. She kept her personal identity so well guarded that even low-level employees at the CIA didn't know her by name. They referred to her by an alphanumeric code name, D6 Alpha, to compartmentalize security. Now that carefully constructed secrecy was about to be tested like never before. The local police, in their haste to chalk up a drug bust, had unwittingly tangled themselves with a woman who had the resources to dismantle entire criminal rings. And Althea, for her part, was caught in a moral tug-of-war. Revealing her true occupation could blow open not just her cover, but also sensitive CIA operations. Yet the potential for personal ruin, losing her freedom and livelihood, was equally dire. She hoped the puzzle pieces might align before she had to make any final, irrevocable disclosures. Unbeknownst to Althea, her CIA superiors were already aware of her predicament. They were watching the situation from afar, torn between stepping in to protect their asset and maintaining plausible deniability. A sudden show of CIA interest in what seemed like a local criminal case would raise too many questions. So Althea's superiors chose to wait and see whether Althea's specialized training would save her. That was a gamble that would prove to have monumental consequences, especially for the officers who thought they could manipulate the narrative and send an innocent woman to prison. And so, on that Friday afternoon in the hushed corridors of the Eastern District of Virginia, the stage was set for a showdown that would shake every person in that courtroom to their core. Althea Hayes was about to become more than just a name on a docket. She was about to make legal history and, more importantly, deliver a searing lesson to those who tried to break her. Growing up in Norfolk, Virginia, Althea had been an exceptionally bright child, forever curious about the inner workings of the world around her. Her mother, Janice Hayes, worked long hours as a nurse, and her father, who had passed away when Althea was only 10, had been a journalist. She inherited her father's keen sense of justice and her mother's compassion. The Hayes family was not wealthy, but they were rich in family bonds. Althea's older brother, Michael, joined the army straight out of high school. He would occasionally send Althea postcards from across the globe, fueling her fascination with foreign cultures, languages, and clandestine affairs. By the time Althea graduated high school, she was fluent in French and Spanish, with a working knowledge of Arabic. She earned a scholarship to Georgetown University, majoring in international relations. There, she caught the attention of a visiting professor who had deep ties to the intelligence community. This professor recommended her for a summer internship at a government agency, the name of which Althea was told to keep confidential. That invitation became the first quiet step on a much longer, labyrinthine path. Her official CIA recruitment was subtle at first, an offhand conversation in a library, a discreet card slipped beneath her dorm room door. "If you want to serve your country," the words on the card read, "we would like to meet you." Althea was skeptical yet intrigued. After a series of hush-hush interviews, background checks, and psychological evaluations, Althea found herself being courted for an entry-level analytical position. By her junior year of college, she was already part of an exclusive pipeline into the agency. Upon graduation, Althea underwent advanced training at the farm in Camp Peary, a CIA training facility in Virginia. There, she learned the art of stealth, operational planning, signals intelligence, and a host of other specialized skills. Her multilingual prowess made her an asset that senior staff quickly recognized. She excelled in counterintelligence operations, demonstrating an uncanny ability to see patterns in chaos. Her first few missions, though unglamorous to an outsider, cemented her reputation as someone who could be both an intelligence gatherer and an undercover operative if needed. The duality of her life was something Althea learned to navigate with precision. In her civilian existence, she portrayed herself as a low-key woman with a passion for community service. It allowed her to drift in and out of different neighborhoods without arousing suspicion. In her clandestine world, Althea had built a network of international contacts. She'd infiltrated extremist groups, diffused potential terrorist plots, and even once negotiated with a foreign intelligence asset on the brink of defecting. She'd been lauded for her ability to gather sensitive intel without leaving so much as a fingerprint of her own presence. However, Althea also understood that such high-stakes work came with sacrifices. She had to keep her mother and brother in the dark. Romantic relationships were practically impossible because she could never be fully transparent about her life. Her own home address often changed as assignments dictated, yet she carried on, driven by a belief in the greater good. Althea's father had always instilled in her the principle that standing up against injustice was a sacred duty. Little did she know she would soon stand up for her own in the unlikeliest battleground of a courtroom. When Althea first sensed she was being tailed by Officer Davies weeks before her arrest, she initially wrote it off as the jittery caution that comes with living multiple lives. She had just returned from a short mission in Western Africa investigating a suspected extremist cell that had links to a drug smuggling chain operating stateside. Although Althea was not directly involved in busting local dealers, she was aware that the intelligence from her last mission indicated a deeper infiltration of American police forces by corrupt factions. But she never imagined it would come crashing into her daily routine in such a personal way. One evening, Althea noticed Davies parked in an unmarked squad car on the corner of her block. Days later, she spotted him again at her grocery store, this time feigning interest in the produce. She rationalized that perhaps the local police had some wide-reaching investigation. Then the so-called suspicious exchange in that rundown part of Alexandria happened. She had been there to observe a local informant who might hold a key piece of a bigger puzzle for her off-the-record CIA assignment. It was purely observational, but Althea had a sense the local police were on some operation of their own. When she left to return to her car, she had no clue that by night's end she'd be booked for felony possession of cocaine. Sitting in the interrogation room after her arrest, Althea realized something was deeply amiss. Detective Foster threatened her with the full weight of the law, but Althea saw behind his eyes a flicker of desperation. It was the look of a man who had pinned all his hopes on making an example out of her. She had faced terrorists and warlords, studied psychological warfare tactics, and recognized that Foster was manufacturing evidence, or at least complicit in it. Yet Althea had to appear outwardly shocked and confused. She couldn't blow her cover, not yet. Meanwhile, Althea's phone calls to her CIA handler went unreturned, standard protocol in scenarios where an operative might be compromised in a local legal net. The agency wanted deniability. They'd often repeated during training that if an agent got entangled in a domestic legal matter without prior authorization, they were on their own until superiors found a way to quietly intervene. Althea's fate hung in a precarious balance, and with each passing day, she pondered how long she could keep her hush. This was the world Althea moved through when she arrived at the courthouse for her preliminary hearing. Every swirl of her mind was dedicated to strategizing a way to prove her innocence without burning her CIA identity. That tension was about to break, forcing her to show the full strength of who she really was and who she was willing to expose in the name of justice. Officer Davies and Detective Foster's official statements painted Althea Hayes as a seasoned drug trafficker with connections to dangerous cartels. According to the report, Althea had been under surveillance for weeks, and the cops claimed to have confiscated conclusive evidence from her trunk. Details emerged of how Althea was supposedly using coded language with street-level dealers, funneling drugs between states, and maintaining shadowy bank accounts. None of these allegations held even a shred of truth, but on paper, it read like the perfect case. For Davies and Foster, Althea's arrest was more than just another drug bust. Their precinct was under immense pressure to crack down on narcotics. Local officials were up for re-election, and the mayor had instituted a zero-tolerance policy. The department was hungry for arrests that seemed high-profile. Althea, quietly unassuming and lacking any significant criminal record, was an ideal scapegoat, especially if they could plant compelling evidence. Unbeknownst to them, Althea's everyday job was not in an office cubicle or a cashier booth, but in an undisclosed wing of the CIA. Behind the scenes, Foster had grown indebted to a local crime boss named Julian Moretti, a well-dressed but ruthless figure who liked to keep a low public profile. Moretti was rumored to funnel money into the pockets of certain police officers in exchange for conveniently lost evidence or overlooked arrests that might otherwise damage his drug trade. But Moretti had grown tired of the arrangement and demanded a big favor to settle the score. Foster's plan was to supply a scapegoat to the press, some mule that would divert attention away from Moretti's operations. Althea was the perfect pawn, a lone black woman with no public connections to power who was spotted in proximity to some of Moretti's street-level runners. Foster had zero inkling that Althea's presence there was part of a covert CIA observation rather than a criminal rendezvous. Things escalated when Althea was booked, and her story appeared bulletproof: no prior record, a stable background, and absolutely no ties to known traffickers. The only link to wrongdoing was the duffel bag that Foster and Davies swore they found in her trunk. Desperate to make the charges stick, they doubled down, fabricating additional reports, forging witness statements, and burying any contradictory evidence. Even the lab tests were suspect. The supposed cocaine bricks Althea had in her trunk were indeed cocaine, but Althea knew they hadn't been there before. She had no reason to store them. Yet Foster was cunning enough to create a paper trail that looked legitimate to higher-ups who rarely questioned their own officers. Officers Davies and Foster had every intention to see this through, but as the court date drew closer, each found themselves plagued by frayed nerves. Foster especially felt a pang of doubt. Althea's unwavering calm got under his skin. On some level, he sensed that her reaction was not normal for someone facing decades in prison. Most innocent people would be frantic, outraged, maybe even crying. Althea was stone cold and confident. She was making phone calls to an employer whose identity she refused to disclose, leaving Davies to wonder if they'd overplayed their hand. Still, they pressed on. If Althea revealed something potentially damaging, they'd figure out a way to discredit her. That's how it worked for them. They had done it before in smaller, less complicated cases, though never with charges this big. While the cops spun their fabricated narrative, Nolan Sharp prepared Althea's defense. Despite Althea's reluctance to reveal details, Nolan set about uncovering inconsistencies in the police work. He analyzed the times and places that Althea was supposedly conducting drug deals and discovered glaring holes in the timeline. Witness statements from Althea's neighbors also contradicted the cops' claims of seeing Althea lugging heavy duffel bags at strange hours. And then there were Althea's bank records. Completely ordinary transactions, consistent paychecks, no unusual windfalls. If she was a big-time trafficker, the money trail simply didn't exist. Yet with the cops' fervor and the stacked evidence of actual contraband, Nolan realized he had a steep uphill battle. As the case advanced, Althea caught snippets of hallway conversations among junior officers at the precinct. They whispered that Althea's arrest might not be as open and shut as the official story suggested. Some were uneasy about the glaring flaws in the evidence chain of custody. Yet the code of silence prevailed. Junior cops dared not publicly contradict their seniors for fear of retaliation or ending their careers prematurely. But small seeds of doubt were planted, the kind that often germinate into a last-minute exoneration or dramatic meltdown in open court. Althea waited, measured, and calculated. The truth about her career was something she had carefully safeguarded for years. Now, ironically, that same truth might be her lifeline. She would rather exonerate herself without revealing her CIA status. But if that became impossible, Althea Hayes would do what she had always been trained to do: protect her own survival and, in the process, dismantle the illusions her enemies had so confidently built. A week before the trial, Althea sat with Nolan in a cramped conference room in the courthouse's basement level. Piles of evidentiary exhibits lay spread across the table: grainy surveillance photos, logs from police radio transmissions, chain of custody documents for the seized narcotics. Nolan combed through every line, looking for the faintest crack. "We can argue in front of the judge that the police overstepped by searching your trunk without a proper warrant," Nolan said, pushing his wire-rimmed glasses up his nose. His eyes were bloodshot from late nights of preparation. "It's probable cause, they'll say, but we've got to challenge that." Althea nodded, her face neutral. What about the possibility that these cops planted the evidence? She asked, her voice betraying no panic, just calm curiosity. That's a bold claim, Nolan replied. Unless we have proof that it was physically impossible for you to have had those bricks in your trunk, we need something concrete. Otherwise, it's your word against two cops who claim they saw the contraband. Althea studied Nolan for a moment. She wanted to trust him, but revealing her CIA background could derail national security or prompt an internal agency investigation that might keep Althea in hot water for months. So she weighed her words. Remember, if I tell you something in confidence, it's protected by attorney-client privilege, right? She asked. Absolutely, Nolan said, leaning forward. Althea paused. She toyed with the idea of letting him in on her secret, but a part of her believed the system could still be made to work without resorting to that. There are external factors at play, she said vaguely. I just need you to know that if it comes down to it, I can produce evidence that exonerates me. Trust me, you'll know it when you see it. Nolan looked at her quizzically, then nodded. He'd grown to respect Althea's self-assurance, though it baffled him at times. Okay, he said, I won't pry, but we should still prepare for every angle in that courtroom. Meanwhile, behind the scenes at the Alexandria Police Department, the tension grew palpable. Officer Davies was increasingly paranoid. He had the sense that Althea's defense was building momentum. Late nights spent at his desk left him feeling cornered, plagued by the fear that some piece of evidence might lead back to him and Foster. He was mostly worried about phone records. During the staged arrest, Davies had used his personal phone to coordinate the duffel bag's placement with an informant who owed him a favor. If Althea's defense team ever subpoenaed his phone logs, Davies's entire narrative would crumble. So he took steps to hide or destroy anything that pointed to wrongdoing. Detective Foster was more brazen, telling Davies to calm the hell down and keep the story consistent. Foster believed that as long as they stuck together, Althea had no chance. Police testimony often held significant weight in court, especially when buttressed by physical evidence. Foster had a personal stake too. Moretti was pressing him to make this case airtight. If Althea walked, Moretti's operation could be scrutinized, and Foster's gravy train would crash. He told himself he wasn't the bad guy. He repeated that Althea was probably guilty of something anyway. But each night, doubt gnawed at him. His anxiety manifested in every short-tempered interaction with colleagues, in every uneasy glance at Althea's case file. Madeline Pierce, the assistant U.S. attorney assigned to prosecute Althea, was busy finalizing her opening statement. She was cautious by nature, but the apparent straightforwardness of this case put her at ease. The police had delivered a tidy report. Althea was found with drugs in her trunk, and the narrative of Althea being a trafficker was backed by sworn affidavit. Madeline took pride in her thoroughness, though, so she did a final background check on Althea. She found Althea's life suspiciously spotless, not even a traffic ticket. Oddly, Althea's employment history had huge gaps, but to Madeline, that merely suggested Althea had something to hide, likely the drug trade, she assumed. The possibility that Althea was actually a covert CIA operative never crossed Madeline's mind. With the trial date looming, Althea made a quiet trip to an unmarked building just outside Langley. She had an off-the-record conversation with an old friend at the agency, someone with enough clout to raise alarm bells. Althea explained her precarious situation, hinting that local cops had orchestrated a frame job. She never asked the agency for a direct intervention, just a heads up if someone tried to dig deeper into her personal files. Her friend listened sympathetically, but made no promises. The agency's official stance would be to remain silent unless Althea's testimony threatened to compromise national security. In short, Althea was on her own. All the while, Althea maintained her composure. She continued her volunteer work at a local community center, albeit discreetly, since her bail conditions allowed her limited movement. Kids in the neighborhood adored her patience in the after-school reading program. She never let slip the stress or the sense of betrayal she felt. Somewhere in Althea's mind, she replayed her training exercises. Remain calm, gather intel, wait for the perfect moment to strike. That perfect moment was rapidly approaching. The tension among the cops, the growing suspicions of Althea's lawyer, the silent watchers from the CIA, and the unwavering confidence of the prosecutor were all on a collision course. The courthouse door was about to swing open to the trial of Althea Hayes, a woman who stood at the crossroads of local corruption and federal secrets. The courthouse buzzed with anticipation on the morning Althea's trial commenced. Reporters loitered outside, hungry for a story about yet another alleged drug kingpin. A small cluster of Althea's friends, family, and curious onlookers filed into the gallery, filling the wooden benches. Judge Diane Kramer, robed in black, took her seat at the bench with an air of composed gravity. With a sharp rap of the gavel, the trial was called to order. Madeline Pierce opened the proceedings on behalf of the prosecution. Her voice was measured and professional. She told the jury they would see physical evidence linking Althea to a stash of cocaine. She painted Althea as a cunning trafficker who used her unassuming demeanor to avoid suspicion. Madeline laid out the timeline according to Detective Foster and Officer Davies, emphasizing the routine surveillance that led the police to Althea's trunk. When Nolan Sharp rose for the defense's opening statement, he did so with quiet conviction. The prosecution's story relies on one key assumption, that the police officer's account is beyond question. But evidence can be planted, ladies and gentlemen. Witnesses can lie. And when you see the holes in the timeline, the inconsistencies in police procedure, you'll realize Althea Hayes is an innocent woman. His words resonated with a certain tension, hinting there was more to come. First on the stand was Officer Davies. He recounted the supposed suspicious activities he observed, how Althea allegedly met with known criminals, and the moment he and Detective Foster decided to search her vehicle. Davies spoke confidently at first, detailing the chain of custody documents that showed the duffel bag of cocaine came from Althea's trunk. But Nolan's cross-examination quickly poked holes in Davies's recollection. "You claim you were parked on 15th Street, correct?" Nolan asked, flipping through a log book. "And you observed Ms. Hayes meet an individual outside a boarded-up shop at precisely 6:45 p.m. "That's correct," Davies answered. Nolan flipped to another page. "Then can you explain why your dash cam footage, which automatically records date and time stamps, shows your vehicle was still in transit at 6:45 p.m.? The GPS shows you were nearly 3 miles away." Davies blinked. His mouth opened in silent confusion before he tried to recover. "The system must have glitched," he mumbled, sending a ripple of murmurs through the courtroom. Nolan pressed on, pointing out the discrepancy in times and how Davies's eyewitness claim might be flawed. Davies's face flushed as he realized his carefully prepared script was unraveling. Detective Foster took the stand next. He carried himself with more self-assurance than Davies, repeating the story about how Althea's trunk was searched under probable cause and that they found the duffel bag full of cocaine in plain view. When Nolan asked why they didn't bother getting a warrant if they had enough time, Foster insisted it was an exigent circumstance. "Are you aware that Ms. Hayes' trunk was locked?" Nolan inquired, eyes narrowed. "How is that plain view if you had to use a crowbar to open it?" Foster's jaw tightened. "She was a flight risk. We needed to secure the contraband before she could flee. Was she in her car at the time?" "No," Foster admitted. "But then how exactly was she going to flee if she wasn't inside the car?" Nolan's voice carried a hint of sarcasm. Foster's lips thinned, and he glared back in defiance. Madeline Pierce tried to smooth over the defense's jabs, redirecting attention to the supposed reliability of sworn police officers. But the jury had witnessed 2 cracks in what should have been a straightforward story. Some jurors shot Althea anxious or sympathetic looks, as though they wondered how she fit into all this. Althea sat calmly, taking occasional notes. Her expression revealed little, but inside she felt a surge of cautious optimism. Nolan was doing exactly what needed to be done: discredit the police narrative. Yet Althea knew discrediting the cops would not be enough. The presence of actual narcotics, the documented chain of custody, and the official lab results still loomed large. Without an alternative explanation for how those drugs ended up in her trunk, the jury could still convict her. Throughout the day, Althea caught Foster glaring at her from across the room. There was a flicker of something akin to fear in his eyes, masked by anger. She also noticed Moretti in the gallery, wearing a tailored suit and a smug grin, as if this were a personal show. Althea recognized him from her clandestine glimpses into local crime networks. She now realized the deeper motive behind her framing: to keep Moretti's name out of the public eye. As the first day ended, Judge Kramer adjourned the court. Reporters scrambled for sound bites outside, but Althea and Nolan slipped away through a side exit, ignoring the barrage of camera flashes. Althea's mother gave her a lingering hug, her eyes brimming with worry. "Don't you worry, Mama," Althea whispered. "This will all be over soon." And in her heart, Althea felt the gears of destiny turning. She wondered how much longer she could stay silent about her CIA ties, because if the next day went poorly, Althea might have to reveal the entire truth in open court. And that, she knew, would blow this trial wide open. The following morning, the atmosphere in the courtroom buzzed with heightened tension. Spectators crowded the benches, sensing that the case was reaching a tipping point. The jury filed in, and Judge Kramer wasted no time instructing Madeleine Pierce to call her first key witness of the day, a forensic analyst who had tested the cocaine found in Althea's trunk. The analyst, Dr. Patricia Lynn, confirmed that the narcotics were high-purity cocaine with a street value of tens of thousands of dollars. On cross-examination, Nolan established that Dr. Lynn had no idea how or when the drugs arrived in Althea's trunk. She only verified what the substance was. It was a neutral, factual testimony that once again underscored the damning physical evidence. Juries often weighed tangible proof heavily, and Althea could practically feel the tide turning against her. Nolan prepared to call Althea to the stand. They had debated whether this was a wise move, but Althea insisted. Judge Kramer addressed her solemnly, reminding her of the risks of self-incrimination. Althea accepted the oath and took a seat, glancing at the jury with calm, measured eyes. Nolan started off gently. "Ms. Hayes, tell us about the evening you were arrested." Althea recounted how she had been in the area observing a building for reasons she couldn't publicly disclose and returned to her car only to be approached by Detective Foster and Officer Davies. "There were no drugs in my trunk," Althea stated firmly. "I had never seen that duffel bag before in my life." Nolan nodded, encouraging her to continue. "So you maintain that the police officers planted it?" She took a breath. "I do." Madeleine Pierce pounced on the chance to cross-examine Althea. She fixed her with a penetrating stare. "You claim to have been observing a building, Ms. Hayes. Why? Are you a private detective? A journalist?" Althea hesitated. She knew this question was coming, and it was the gateway to her carefully guarded truth. Her eyes flickered toward Nolan, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. The moment had arrived. Either keep the secret and risk a wrongful conviction, or reveal it and risk the fallout. "I work," Althea began, her voice steady, "as an intelligence operative for the Central Intelligence Agency." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. The stenographer paused mid-keystroke, and Madeleine Pierce narrowed her eyes, looking almost offended by the claim. Judge Kramer leaned forward. "Ms. Hayes, are you claiming to be a CIA operative?" "Yes, Your Honor," Althea replied, her tone unwavering. "I've worked with the agency for nearly a decade. My presence near that building was part of an off-duty observation connected to a separate intelligence matter. I cannot fully disclose the mission details, as they are classified, but I can provide proof of my credentials to the court in a sealed proceeding if necessary." For a moment, silence blanketed the room. The jury looked stunned, and the media representatives in the gallery nearly fell out of their seats in excitement. Madeleine Pierce frowned, glancing at Althea in disbelief. "That's quite a story," she said, her voice dripped with skepticism. "You expect this court to believe you're a CIA agent, yet you're here on trial for drug trafficking?" Althea remained calm. "Yes, and I can verify this by having my agency credentials delivered to the judge. I've already made contact with someone within the CIA who can confirm my employment if the court agrees to a sealed hearing." Judge Kramer tapped her pen against the bench. "Counsel, approach," she ordered, motioning for Madeleine Pierce and Nolan Sharp to come forward. They had a hushed conversation, resulting in the judge agreeing to an in-camera review of Althea's proof. The court took a short recess, and Althea's heart hammered as she stepped off the stand, bracing for what might come next. After the recess, Judge Kramer returned with a grave expression. "I have just conducted a private review of documentation provided by Ms. Hayes, including a corroborating phone call to a CIA office in Langley, Virginia. It appears Ms. Hayes is indeed a CIA operative, although details beyond that are classified. The jury is instructed that Ms. Hayes's background is not on trial here, but you are permitted to consider the credibility implications of her testimony." A stunned hush fell over the room, broken only by the frantic scribbling of reporters taking notes. The expression on Detective Foster's face morphed into pure horror. Officer Davies looked as though he might faint, Madeline Pierce tried to maintain her composure, but she was clearly thrown off balance. Her ironclad drug trafficker narrative now collided with the revelation that the defendant might be a legitimate intelligence officer. Althea returned to the stand, her posture even straighter than before. "My mission, as far as I can share," she explained, "involved keeping tabs on certain individuals known to have ties to international drug cartels and extremist groups. My assignment was strictly observational that night. I had no reason to purchase, possess, or distribute narcotics. The presence of these drugs in my trunk is entirely fabricated by those who either misunderstood my presence or sought to use me as a scapegoat." Nolan gently guided her back to the key events of the arrest. As Althea recounted the inconsistencies in the police narrative, the jury seemed transfixed. This wasn't a run-of-the-mill defendant. The story had all the hallmarks of a high-stakes spy drama, except it was unfolding in real time in a real courtroom. When Madeline Pierce attempted to salvage her case, asking Althea why she didn't disclose her CIA affiliation immediately upon arrest, Althea pointed out that the CIA requires its agents to maintain cover unless authorized. She also didn't trust local law enforcement, given how quickly they had moved to charge her. It was a risk to blow her cover, but faced with a wrongful felony conviction, she had no other option. By the time Althea stepped down from the stand, the entire dynamic of the trial had shifted. The prosecution's case was no longer just about alleged drug possession. It had become a question of whether two police officers had lied under oath to trap an innocent CIA operative. And as Althea met eyes with Detective Foster across the courtroom, she recognized fear flickering behind his anger, fear of the unstoppable chain reaction that this revelation would set in motion. The final day of trial arrived with the courthouse in a frenzy. Word had spread beyond local channels, drawing national media outlets to cover the CIA agent versus local cops drama. Judge Kramer, not one to seek the limelight, fended off requests for interviews and admonished any further leaks. Still, the public's curiosity was insatiable. Madeline Pierce did her best to pivot the prosecution's argument. She tried to maintain that Althea's CIA background didn't necessarily disprove the drug charges. However, the seeds of doubt were firmly planted in the jury's mind. Why would a CIA operative risk her career, her clearance, and her life to run a meager drug smuggling operation? Nolan Sharp capitalized on the momentum. He recalled Althea for a brief follow-up, during which she produced redacted documents from the CIA verifying certain mission parameters. Although the judge only allowed a limited portion to be shown to the jury, it confirmed Althea was engaged in a legitimate intelligence function on the night of her arrest. Then came the day's biggest bombshell. Nolan called a surprise witness, a young patrol officer named Lena Ortega who worked at the same precinct as Detective Foster and Officer Davies. Lena approached the stand nervously, eyes flicking to the two senior officers seated at the prosecution's table as she was sworn in. Lena's voice trembled. I have information about irregularities in the case file," she began. "I overheard Detective Foster talking with someone on the phone about a duffel bag. He was saying, 'Make sure it's stuffed and placed where we can find it.' At the time, I thought maybe he was referring to legitimate police work, but after seeing M.S. Hayes' case, face it, I can't stay silent." The courtroom exploded in gasps. Judge Kramer immediately called for order as the gallery erupted into commotion. The bailiffs moved to quell the outbursts. Foster's face blanched, and he shot Lena a threatening stare that could slice steel. Officer Davies hung his head, beads of sweat forming at his temple. Nolan pressed forward with careful but piercing questions. "Officer Ortega, are you suggesting Detective Foster arranged for narcotics to be planted in M.S. Hayes' trunk?" Lena nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, that's what I believe happened based on what I heard. I also checked some log entries. There were missing timestamps and discrepancies in the chain of custody forms. Detective Foster told me to mind my own business when I asked about it." The gallery's hush was deafening. Onlookers stared at Foster, whose expression had hardened into fury. Madeline Pierce looked aghast, glancing between Foster and Davies, perhaps realizing she'd been handed a fraudulent case. Nolan then submitted for evidence a set of phone records he'd obtained through a last-minute subpoena. They showed suspicious calls between Foster, Davies, and a known associate of Julian Moretti. The timestamps coincided precisely with Althea's arrest time window. Shock waves reverberated through the courtroom. A collage of corruption was materializing before everyone's eyes, from Moretti's influence over Foster to the scapegoating of Althea. Madeline Pierce stood, her voice subdued. Your Honor, in light of this new testimony and evidence, I request a recess. The prosecution needs to re-evaluate its position. Judge Kramer nodded gravely, but her frustration was clear. We will take a brief recess, she said. Both counsels are to meet in my chambers immediately. Reporters scrambled to call their editors or live tweet updates, while Althea quietly exited with Nolan. Outside in the hallway, Althea's family enveloped her in hugs. Nolan's phone rang almost incessantly, presumably from media outlets hungry for statements. Althea, physically and emotionally exhausted, sank onto a wooden bench. For the first time in weeks, she allowed a small spark of relief to bloom inside her. After nearly an hour, the judge reconvened court. Madeline Pierce rose, her posture stiff. Your Honor, the prosecution moves to dismiss all charges against Ms. Hayes. In light of newly discovered evidence, we believe continuing would be a miscarriage of justice. A thunderous chatter broke out. Judge Kramer hammered her gavel. Order. Ms. Hayes, you are free to go. This court will remain in session to address ancillary matters related to the conduct of Detective Foster and Officer Davies. Bailiffs, please detain Detective Foster and Officer Davies for immediate questioning. Court is adjourned. The abrupt shift in the room's energy was overwhelming. Applause broke out among Althea's supporters. Cameras flashed, capturing Foster's stunned face as officers, his own colleagues, placed him in handcuffs. Davies looked on the verge of tears as he was similarly restrained. The tall walls of the courtroom seemed to vibrate with the intensity of the unfolding drama. Moretti, who had been watching from the back, slipped out a side door, his face contorted in anger and worry, well aware his own name would soon surface in subsequent investigations. Althea remained standing, shoulders trembling with a mix of relief and lingering fury. She spotted Lena Ortega wiping away tears, the burden of her risky testimony still heavy. Nolan placed a comforting hand on Althea's shoulder and whispered, "It's over." But Althea knew it wasn't entirely over. Her CIA superiors would have questions. An internal review would follow. She might face consequences for revealing her identity, but those seemed minor compared to spending years in prison for a crime she didn't commit. More importantly, justice had prevailed in a system that often tilted against people like her, people without the perceived power or privilege to fight back. Except Althea did have power, a background in clandestine operations, and the resolve never to be a victim of corruption. As Althea left the courtroom, a throng of reporters closed in, shouting questions. She offered no comments, only a subdued smile that said everything she needed to convey. In her mind, she replayed the entire ordeal, from the moment handcuffs were slipped around her wrists to the explosive revelations that turned the trial upside down. She silently thanked her father for instilling in her the will to confront injustice, her mother for the unwavering love, and her CIA, a training for teaching her how to stand firm under the greatest pressures. Behind her, the echoes of a shattered frame-up reverberated. Detective Foster and Officer Davies would face indictments, their reputations ruined, their misdeeds laid bare. The karmic cycle had come full circle, and Althea's name was cleared by the very institution that nearly condemned her. The courtyard outside the courthouse was flooded with flashbulbs and microphones, capturing Althea's quiet exit from one of the biggest legal battles of her life and the start of her next chapter, free and vindicated. In the weeks following the dramatic conclusion of Althea Hayes' trial, a wave of repercussions rolled through the Alexandria Police Department and beyond. Public outrage soared upon learning that the men trusted to uphold justice had orchestrated a heinous frame job. Captain Laura Cortez, the head of the precinct, faced intense scrutiny for her lack of oversight. Press conferences erupted with questions about how such corruption had slipped through the chain of command. Detective Foster and Officer Davies soon found themselves in a reversed role, defendants in a criminal trial. They faced charges of evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. When pressed for a statement, Foster sneered at the cameras, offering a vague claim of being pressured by powerful forces, a possible reference to Moretti's involvement. Davies, visibly trembling under the harsh glare of public condemnation, tried to negotiate a plea deal in exchange for testifying against Foster and Moretti. Meanwhile, Althea Hayes became something of a local legend. Though she kept a low profile, the news that a CIA operative had been framed by dirty cops captured the public imagination. Community leaders hailed her courage. Civil rights groups invoked her case as a clarion call for systemic reform. Althea responded in her characteristic quiet style. "I'm just grateful the truth came to light." Behind closed doors, Althea met with her CIA superiors for a debriefing. She explained how she'd been caught in a local police net while conducting an off-duty observation related to an ongoing international investigation. The agency recognized that Althea had little choice but to blow her cover to protect herself from incarceration. Some frowned at the breach, but Althea's track record spoke volumes. While she'd have to undergo additional security reviews and possibly move to a different operational role, Althea was not stripped of her position. Her unique experience was deemed invaluable by certain higher-ups who admired her resilience. Officially, the agency kept Althea's name out of press releases, citing sensitive intelligence matters. As for Julian Moretti, the local kingpin who orchestrated Althea's scapegoating, the unraveling of the trial exposed his dealings with Foster. Bank records and phone logs tied him to multiple instances of bribery and drug distribution. Facing an ironclad case, Moretti tried to flee the country. He didn't get far. Federal agents caught up with him at a private airstrip just outside the city. He too would face a lengthy trial, where Althea's name appeared again, but this time as part of the background in a broader federal indictment. Officer Lena Ortega's courageous testimony transformed her into a departmental pariah for some time. Fellow officers who were once cordial treated her with distance, while others secretly admired her bravery. Despite departmental pushback, the community saw Lena as a hero who refused to let the badge be tarnished by criminals in uniform. Eventually, Internal Affairs launched a thorough investigation into the precinct, leading to several resignations, demotions, and a renewed emphasis on ethics training. For Althea, life settled into a cautious new rhythm. She continued volunteering at the community center, though many recognized her now. A few parents hesitated, unsure if having a CIA agent around their kids was comforting or intimidating. Althea handled these delicate social recalibrations with her usual grace, choosing to focus on the children who needed her. When asked about her CIA work, she smiled politely and replied, "I'm just here to help with reading programs." Her family, especially her mother Janice, felt a mix of relief and residual anger. "Those cops could have taken you from us," Janice cried one evening at the dinner table. Althea hugged her mother tight. "They didn't," she reassured. "We stood our ground." Michael, her Army veteran brother, flew in from his post overseas just to see Althea. They shared a sibling bond forged by the understanding that sometimes you had to fight for what was right, no matter the odds. Althea's lawyer, Nolan Sharp, soared to new prominence after the trial. His adept handling of the case garnered him numerous new clients. Yet he remained grounded, often citing Althea's story as a testament to why due process matters, especially for those who may be targeted by corruption or prejudice. Nolan also handled Althea's civil suit against the Alexandria Police Department, resulting in a sizable settlement. Althea donated a large portion of it to a legal defense fund for wrongful convictions and to the children's literacy programs where she volunteered. In the end, Althea's journey came full circle. A framed suspect, she had revealed her CIA identity only to see justice served on a stage bigger than any covert operation she'd undertaken. The hard karma Althea's foes experienced was not just about personal downfall, but the broader reckoning that rippled through the institutions involved. Corruption was exposed, an innocent woman was vindicated, and a system that so often fails to protect the vulnerable was forced to confront its own dark corners. Standing on a balcony overlooking the Potomac River one evening, Althea allowed herself a moment of reflection. She recalled the unwavering face of Detective Foster when he first arrested her, the stone-cold silence of the interrogation room, and the moment she chose to speak her truth in open court. For years, Althea's career had been about gathering secrets, but in that pivotal instant, revealing her biggest secret set her free. With the wind gently rustling her hair, Althea Hayes smiled. She was not just an intelligence officer, not just a volunteer, not just another face in the crowd. She was living proof that justice, though delayed, could indeed be served. and that sometimes the most potent weapon against lies and corruption is the quiet courage to stand up and say, "No, I will not be broken." That quiet smile remained as Althea turned from the railing. The cool night air a stark contrast to the heated atmosphere she had endured for weeks. Freedom felt different now, layered with the weight of exposure and the undeniable proof that the system, however flawed, could bend toward truth under extreme pressure. Her steps were light as she re-entered her apartment, a place that had felt more like a temporary safe house than a home during the ordeal. Now, it seemed poised to become a sanctuary once more. The following weeks involved navigating the intricate corridors of Langley, not as an operative returning from a mission, but as an asset whose cover had been publicly compromised. The internal review was less an interrogation and more a careful assessment of damage and potential future utility. Seated across from a panel of senior officials, Althea recounted the events with the same measured calm she had displayed in court. She presented her perspective. The framed job was unexpected, the decision to reveal her identity a calculated risk necessary for survival, taken only when all other avenues seemed closed. There were probing questions about procedural adherence, about the initial observation that placed her near Moretti's network, about the unauthorized contact with her agency friend. Althea answered honestly, owning her choices. The panel concluded that while the situation was unprecedented and regrettable, her actions were understandable given the extraordinary circumstances. Her security clearance remained intact, though her field operational status was temporarily suspended. A reassignment followed, shifting her to a strategic analysis role focusing on domestic threats and corruption infiltrating local systems, leveraging her unique, albeit unwanted, first-hand experience. It wasn't the field work she thrived on, but it was meaningful, a way to turn her personal battle into a broader fight against the very forces that had targeted her. Life outside the agency also required recalibration. Returning to the community center, she found herself greeted with a mixture of awe, curiosity, and a touch of apprehension. Some parents whispered, pointing her out. Others approached her directly, thanking her for her bravery or asking tentative questions about her secret life. Althea navigated these interactions patiently, gently redirecting conversations back to the children and the reading program. She found solace in the simple act of helping a child sound out a difficult word, a grounding reality far removed from courtrooms and clandestine operations. Lena Ortega, the young officer whose testimony had been pivotal, reached out privately. They met for coffee, two women bound by an unexpected intersection of courage and consequence. Lena spoke of the ostracization within the department, but also of the quiet support from unexpected corners. Althea offered encouragement, reminding her that integrity often comes at a cost, but yields a reward no intimidation can diminish. The trials of Caleb Foster, Grant Davies, and Julian Moretti proceeded, becoming less about Althea Hayes and more about the documented corruption they represented. Davies accepted a plea deal, his testimony painting a damning picture of Foster's desperation and Moretti's influence. Foster fought the charges vehemently, but was ultimately convicted, his fall from grace a stark warning within the department. Moretti, facing a mountain of evidence related to his criminal empire, received a lengthy sentence, his reign over parts of the city's underworld effectively dismantled. Justice, slow and methodical, ground its way through the system they had once manipulated with impunity. For Althea, the echoes of the trial faded, replaced by the rhythm of her new role and the quiet satisfaction of reclaiming her life. The experience had forged her anew, leaving scars, but also reinforcing the core tenets she inherited from her parents: resilience, a commitment to justice, and the courage to face adversity head-on. She was no longer just D6 Alpha, the covert operative, nor simply Althea Hayes, the unassuming volunteer. She was a synthesis of both, a woman who understood the shadows but chose to live firmly in the light, forever watchful, forever dedicated to the principle that truth, even when buried deep, possesses an unyielding power to surface and prevail. Her fight was over, but her vigilance remained, a quiet sentinel standing against the potential for darkness, ready for whatever came next.